Студия «Ардис» представляет аудиокниги. Лучшие произведения мировой литературы. Подробную информацию об аудиокнигах студии «Ардис» смотрите в интернете на сайте www.ardisbook.ru.
Dark They Were, and Golden-Eyed, by Bradbury. The rocket's metal cooled in the meadow winds. Its lid gave a bulging pop. From its clock interior stepped a man, a woman, and 3 children. The other passengers whispered away across the Martian meadow, leaving the man alone among his family. The man felt his hair flutter, and the tissues of his body draw tight as if he were standing at the center of a vacuum. His wife, before him, trembled. The children, small seeds, might at any instant be sown to all the Martian climes. The children looked up at him. His face was cold. "What's wrong?" asked his wife. "Let's get back on the rocket." "Go back to Earth?" "Yes. Listen." The wind blew, whining. At any moment, the Martian air might draw his soul from him, as marrow comes from a white bone. He looked at Martian hills that time had worn with a crushing pressure of years. He saw the old cities, lost and lying like children's delicate bones among the blowing lakes of grass. "Chin up, Harry," said his wife. "It's too late. We've come at least 65 million miles or more." The children, with their yellow hair, hollered at the deep dome of Martian sky. There was no answer but the racing hiss of wind through the stiff grass. He picked up the luggage in his cold hands. "Here we go," he said. A man standing on the edge of a sea, ready to wade in and be drowned. They walked into town. Their name was Bittering. Harry and his wife Cora, Tim, Laura, and David. They built a small white cottage and ate good breakfasts there, but the fear was never gone. It lay with Mr. Bittering and Mrs. Bittering, a third, unbidden partner at every midnight talk, at every dawn awakening. "I feel like a salt crystal," he often said, "in a mountain stream, being washed away. We don't belong here. We're Earth people. This is Mars. It was meant for Martians. For heaven's sake, Cora, let's buy tickets for home." But she only shook her head. "One day the atom bomb will fix Earth. Then we'll be safe here." "Safe and insane." "Tick, tock, 7 o'clock, sang the voice clock. "Time to get up." And they did. Something made him check everything each morning. Warm hearth, potted blood geraniums, precisely as if he expected something to be amiss. The morning paper was toast warm from the 6 a.m. Earth rocket. He broke its seal and tilted it at his breakfast plate. He forced himself to be convivial. "Colonial days all over again," he declared. "Why, in another year there'll be 1 million Earthmen on Mars. Big cities, everything. They said we'd fail. Said the Martians would resent our invasion. But did we find any Martians? Not a living soul. Oh, we found their empty cities, but no one in them. Right?" A river of wind submerged the house. When the windows ceased rattling, Mr. Bittering swallowed and looked at the children. "I don't know," said David. "Maybe there are Martians around we don't see. Sometimes nights, I think I hear 'em. I hear the wind. The sand hits my window. I get scared. And I see those towns way up in the mountains where the Martians lived a long time ago. And I think I see things moving around those towns, Papa. And I wonder if those Martians mind us living here. I wonder if they won't do something to us for coming here." "Nonsense." Mr. Bittering looked out of the windows. "We're clean, decent people." He looked at his children. "All dead cities have some kind of ghosts in them. Memories, I mean." He stared at the hills. "You see a staircase, and you wonder what Martians looked like climbing it. You see Martian paintings, and you wonder what the painter was like. You make a little ghost in your mind, a memory. It's quite natural. Imagination." He stopped. "You haven't been prowling up in those ruins, have you?" "No, Papa." David looked at his shoes. "See that you stay away from them. Pass the jam." "Just the same," said little David, "I bet something happens." Something happened that afternoon. Laura stumbled through the settlement, crying. She dashed blindly onto the porch. "Mother! Father! The war! Earth!" she sobbed. "A radio flash just came. Atom bombs hit New York. All the space rockets blown up. No more rockets to Mars, ever." "Oh, Harry!" The mother held onto her husband and daughter. "Are you sure, Laura?" asked the father quietly. Laura wept. "We're stranded on Mars, forever and ever." For a long time, there was only the sound of the wind in the late afternoon. Alone, thought Bittering. Only 1,000 of us here. No way back. No way. No way. Sweat poured from his face, and his hands, and his body. He was drenched in the hotness of his fear. He wanted to strike Laura, cry, "No, you're lying! The rockets will come back!" Instead, he stroked Laura's head against him and said, "The rockets will get through. Someday. In 5 years, maybe. It takes that long to build one. Father, what will we do?" "Go about our business, of course. Raise crops and children. Wait. Keep things going until the war ends and the rockets come again." The 2 boys stepped out onto the porch. "Children," he said, sitting there, looking beyond them. "I've something to tell you." "We know," they said. Bittering wandered into the garden to stand alone in his fear. As long as the rockets had spun a silver web across space, he had been able to accept Mars, for he had always told himself, "Tomorrow, if I want, I can buy a ticket and go back to Earth." But now, the web gone, the rockets lying in jigsaw heaps of molten girder and unsnaked wire, Earth people left to the strangeness of Mars, the cinnamon dusts and wine airs, to be baked like gingerbread shapes in Martian summers, put into harvested storage by Martian winters. What would happen to him The others. This was the moment Mars had waited for. Now it would eat them. He got down on his knees in the flower bed, a spade in his nervous hands. Work, he thought. Work and forget. He glanced up from the garden to the Martian mountains. He thought of the proud old Martian names that had once been on those peaks. Earthmen dropping from the sky had gazed upon hills, rivers, Martian seas left nameless in spite of names. Once, Martians had built cities, named cities, climbed mountains, named mountains, sailed seas, named seas. Mountains melted, seas drained, cities tumbled. In spite of this, the Earthmen had felt a silent guilt at putting new names to these ancient hills and valleys. Nevertheless, man lives by symbol and label. The names were given. Mr. Bittering felt very alone in his garden under the Martian sun, bent here, planting earth flowers in a wild soil. Think. Keep thinking. Different things. Keep your mind free of Earth, the atom war, the lost rockets. He perspired. He glanced about. No one watching. He removed his tie. Pretty bold, he thought. First your coat off, now your tie. He hung it neatly on a peach tree he had imported as a sapling from Massachusetts. He returned to his philosophy of names and mountains. The Earthmen had changed names. Now there were Hormel Valleys, Roosevelt Seas, Ford Hills, Vanderbilt Plateaus, Rockefeller Rivers on Mars. It wasn't right. The American settlers had shown wisdom, using old Indian prairie names: Wisconsin, Minnesota, Idaho, Ohio, Utah, Milwaukee, Waukegan, Osseo. The old names, the old meanings. Staring at the mountains wildly, he thought, "Are you up there? All the dead ones, you Martians. Well, here we are. Alone, cut off. Come down. Move us out. We're helpless." The wind blew a shower of peach blossoms. He put out his sun-browned hand, gave a small cry. He touched the blossoms, picked them up. He turned them. He touched them again and again. Then he shouted for his wife, "Cora!" She appeared at a window. He ran to her. "Cora, these blossoms." She handled them. "Do you see? They're different. They've changed. They're not peach blossoms anymore." "Look all right to me," she said. "They're not. They're wrong. I can't tell how. An extra petal, a leaf, something. The color, the smell." The children ran out in time to see their father hurrying about the garden, pulling up radishes, onions, and carrots from their beds. "Cora, come look!" They handled the onions, the radishes, the carrots among them. "Do they look like carrots?" "Yes." "No," she hesitated. "I don't know." "They're changed." "Perhaps." "You know they have. Onions, but not onions. Carrots, but not carrots. Taste, the same, but different. Smell, not like it used to be." He felt his heart pounding, and he was afraid. He dug his fingers into the earth. Cora, what's happening? What is it? We've got to get away from this. He ran across the garden. Each tree felt his touch. The roses! The roses! They're turning green! And they stood, looking at the green roses. And 2 days later, Tim came running. Come see the cow! I was milking her, and I saw it. Come on! They stood in the shed and looked at their one cow. It was growing a third horn. And the lawn in front of their house, very quietly and slowly, was coloring itself like spring violets. Seed from earth, but growing up a soft purple. We must get away, said Bittering. We'll eat this stuff and then we'll change. Who knows to what? I can't let it happen. There's only one thing to do. Burn this food. It's not poisoned. But it is. Subtly, very subtly, a little bit, a very little bit. We mustn't touch it. He looked with dismay at their house. Even the house. The wind's done something to it. The air's burned it. The fog at night. The boards, all warped out of shape. It's not an Earthman's house anymore. Oh, your imagination! He put on his coat and tie. I'm going into town. We've got to do something now. I'll be back. Wait, Harry! His wife cried. But he was gone. In town, on the shadowy step of the grocery store, the men sat with their hands on their knees, conversing with great leisure and ease. Mr. Bittering wanted to fire a pistol in the air. What are you doing, you fools? He thought. Sitting here. You've heard the news. We're stranded on this planet. Well, move. Aren't you frightened? Aren't you afraid? What are you going to do? Hello, Harry, said everyone. Look, he said to them. You did hear the news the other day, didn't you? They nodded and laughed. Sure. Sure, Harry. What are you going to do about it? Do, Harry. Do? What can we do? Build a rocket, that's what. A rocket, Harry? To go back to all that trouble? Oh, Harry. But you must want to go back. Have you noticed the peach blossoms? The onions? The grass? Why, yes, Harry. Seems we did, said one of the men. Doesn't it scare you? Can't recall that it did much, Harry. Idiots! Now, Harry. Bittering wanted to cry. You've got to work with me. If we stay here, we'll all change. The air. Don't you smell it? Something in the air. A Martian virus, maybe. Some seed or a pollen. Listen to me. They stared at him. Sam, he said to one of them. Yes, Harry? Will you help me build a rocket? Harry, I got a whole load of metal and some blueprints. You want to work in my metal shop on a rocket? You're welcome. I'll sell you that metal for $500. You should be able to construct a right pretty rocket if you work alone, in about 30 years. Everyone laughed. Don't laugh. Sam looked at him with quiet good humor. Sam, Bittering said. Your eyes. What about them, Harry? Didn't they used to be gray? Well, now, I don't remember. They were, weren't they? Why do you ask, Harry? Because now they're kind of yellow-colored. Is that so, Harry? Sam said casually. And you're taller and thinner. You might be right, Harry. Sam, you shouldn't have yellow eyes. Harry, what color eyes have you got? Sam said. My eyes? They're blue, of course. Here you are, Harry. Sam handed him a pocket mirror. Take a look at yourself. Mr. Bittering hesitated, and then raised the mirror to his face. There were little, very dim flecks of new gold captured in the blue of his eyes. Now look what you've done, said Sam a moment later. You've broken my mirror. Harry Bittering moved into the metal shop and began to build the rocket. Men stood in the open door and talked and joked without raising their voices. Once in a while they gave him a hand on lifting something, but mostly they just idled and watched him with their yellowing eyes. It's supper time, Harry, they said. His wife appeared with his supper in a wicker basket. I won't touch it, he said. I'll eat only food from our deep freeze, food that came from Earth, nothing from our garden. His wife stood watching him. You can't build a rocket. I worked in a shop once, when I was 20. I know metal. Once I get it started, the others will help, he said, not looking at her, laying out the blueprints. Harry, she said helplessly. We've got to get away, Cora. We've got to. The nights were full of wind that blew down the empty moonlit sea meadows, past the little white chess cities, lying for their 12,000th year in the shallows. In the Earthmen's settlement, the Bittering house shook with a feeling of change. Lying abed, Mr. Bittering felt his bones shifted, shaped, melted like gold. His wife, lying beside him, was dark from many sunny afternoons. Dark she was, and golden, burnt almost black by the sun, sleeping, and the children metallic in their beds, and the wind roaring forlorn and changing through the old peach trees, the violet grass, shaking out green rose petals. The fear would not be stopped. It had his throat and heart. It dripped in a wetness of the arm and the temple and the trembling palm. A green star rose in the east. A strange word emerged from Mr. Bittering's lips. Eort. Eort. He repeated it. It was a Martian word. He knew no Martian. In the middle of the night, he arose and dialed a call through to Simpson, the archaeologist. Simpson, what does the word Eort mean? Why, that's the old Martian word for our planet Earth. Why? No special reason. The telephone slipped from his hand. Hello? 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 It kept saying while he sat gazing out at the green star. Bittering! Harry, are you there? The days were full of metal sound. He laid the frame of the rocket with the reluctant help of 3 indifferent men. He grew very tired in an hour or so, and had to sit down. The altitude, laughed a man. Are you Eating, Harry? Asked another. I'm eating, he said angrily. From your deep freeze? Yes. You're getting thinner, Harry. I'm not. And taller. Liar. His wife took him aside a few days later. Harry, I've used up all the food in the deep freeze. There's nothing left. I'll have to make sandwiches using food grown on Mars. He sat down, heavily. You must eat, she said. You're weak. Yes, he said. He took a sandwich, opened it, looked at it, and began to nibble at it. And take the rest of the day off, she said. It's hot. The children want to swim in the canals and hike. Please come along. I can't waste time. This is a crisis. Just for an hour, she urged. A swim will do you good. He rose, sweating. All right. Leave me alone. I'll come. Good for you, Harry. The sun was hot, the day quiet. There was only an immense staring burn upon the land. They moved along the canal, the father, the mother, the racing children in their swimsuits. They stopped and ate meat sandwiches. He saw their skin baking brown, and he saw the yellow eyes of his wife and his children, their eyes that were never yellow before. A few tremblings shook him, but were carried off in waves of pleasant heat as he lay in the sun. He was too tired to be afraid. Cora, how long have your eyes been yellow? She was bewildered. Always, I guess. They didn't change from brown in the last 3 months. She bit her lips. No. Why do you ask? Never mind. They sat there. The children's eyes, he said. They're yellow too. Sometimes growing children's eyes change color. Maybe we're children too. At least to Mars. That's a thought. He laughed. Think I'll swim. They leaped into the canal water, and he let himself sink down and down to the bottom like a golden statue, and lie there in green silence. All was water, quiet and deep. All was peace. He felt the steady, slow current drift him easily. If I lie here long enough, he thought, the water will work and eat away my flesh until the bones show like coral. Just my skeleton left. And then the water can build on that skeleton. Green things, deep water things, red things, yellow things. Change. Change. Slow, deep, silent change. And isn't that what it is up there? He saw the sky submerged above him, the sun made Martian by atmosphere and time and space. Up there, a big river, he thought, a Martian river, all of us lying deep in it, in our pebble houses, in our sunken boulder houses, like crayfish hidden, and the water washing away our old bodies, and lengthening the bones, and... He let himself drift up through the soft light. Tim sat on the edge of the canal, regarding his father seriously. Utha, he said. What? Asked his father. The boy smiled. You know, Utha's the Martian word for father. Where did you learn it? I don't know. Around. Utha. What do you want?" The boy hesitated. I want to change my name." "Change it?" "Yes." His mother swam over. "What's wrong with Tim for a name?" Tim fidgeted. "The other day you called Tim, Tim, Tim. I didn't even hear. I said to myself, 'That's not my name. I've a new name I want to use.'" Mr. Bittering held to the side of the canal, his body cold and his heart pounding slowly. "What is this new name?" "Linnell. Isn't that a good name? Can I use it? Can I? Please?" Mr. Bittering put his hand to his head. He thought of the rocket, himself working alone, himself alone even among his family. So alone. He heard his wife say, "Why not?" He heard himself say, "Yes, you can use it." "Yay!" screamed the boy. "I'm Linnell! Linnell!" Racing down the meadowlands, he danced and shouted. Mr. Bittering looked at his wife. "Why did we do that?" "I don't know," she said. "It just seemed like a good idea." They walked into the hills. They strolled on old mosaic paths beside still pumping fountains. The paths were covered with a thin film of cool water all summer long. You kept your bare feet cool all the day, splashing as in a creek, wading. They came to a small deserted Martian villa with a good view of the valley. It was on top of a hill. Blue marble halls, large murals, a swimming pool. It was refreshing in this hot summer time. The Martians hadn't believed in large cities. "How nice," said Mrs. Bittering. "If you could move up here to this villa for the summer." "Come on," he said. "We're going back to town. There's work to be done on the rocket." But as he worked that night, the thought of the cool blue marble villa entered his mind. As the hours passed, the rocket seemed less important. In the flow of days and weeks, the rocket receded and dwindled. The old fever was gone. It frightened him to think he had let it slip this way. But somehow the heat, the air, the working conditions... He heard the men murmuring on the porch of his metal shop. "Everyone's going. You heard?" "All right. That's right." Bittering came out. Going where? He saw a couple of trucks, loaded with children and furniture, drive down the dusty street. "Up to the villa," said the man. "Yeah, Harry. I'm going. So is Sam. Aren't you, Sam?" "That's right, Harry. What about you?" "I've got work to do here." "Work? You can finish that rocket in the autumn, when it's cooler." He took a breath. "I got the frame all set up." "In the autumn is better." Their voices were lazy in the heat. "Got to work," he said. "Autumn," they reasoned. And they sounded so sensible, so right. Autumn would be best, he thought. Plenty of time then. "No!" cried part of himself, deep down, put away, locked tight, suffocating. "No! No!" "In the autumn," he said. "Come on, Harry," they all said. "Yes," he said, feeling his flesh melt in the hot liquid air. "Yes, in the autumn. I'll begin work again then." "I got a villa near the Tira Canal," said someone. You mean the Roosevelt Canal, don't you? Tira, the old Martian name. But on the map, forget the map, it's Tira now. Now I found a place in the Pillen Mountains. You mean the Rockefeller Range, said Bittering. I mean the Pillen Mountains, said Sam. Yes, said Bittering, buried in the hot, swarming air. The Pillen Mountains. Everyone worked at loading the truck in the hot, still afternoon of the next day. Laura, Tim, and David carried packages, or, as they preferred to be known, Till, Linnell, and Were carried packages. The furniture was abandoned in the little white cottage. It looked just fine in Boston, said the mother, and here in the cottage. But up at the villa? No. We'll get it when we come back in the autumn. Bittering himself was quiet. I've some ideas on furniture for the villa, he said after a time. Big, lazy furniture. What about your encyclopedia? You're taking it along, surely. Mr. Bittering glanced away. I'll come and get it next week. They turned to their daughter. What about your New York dresses? The bewildered girl stared. Why, I don't want them anymore. They shut off the gas, the water, they locked the doors, and walked away. Father peered into the truck. Gosh, we're not taking much, he said. Considering all we brought to Mars, this is only a handful. He started the truck. Looking at the small white cottage for a long moment, he was filled with a desire to rush to it, touch it, say goodbye to it, for he felt as if he were going away, on a long journey, leaving something to which he could never quite return, never understand again. Just then, Sam and his family drove by in another truck. Hi, Bittering. Here we go. The truck swung down the ancient highway, out of town. There were 60 others traveling the same direction. The town filled with a silent, heavy dust from their passage. The canal waters lay blue in the sun, and a quiet wind moved in the strange trees. Goodbye, town, said Bittering. Goodbye, goodbye, said the family, waving to it. They did not look back again. Summer burned the canals dry. Summer moved like flame upon the meadows. In the empty earth settlement, the painted houses flaked and peeled. Rubber tires upon which children had swung in backyards hung suspended like stopped clock pendulums in the blazing air. At the metal shop, the rocket frame began to rust. In the quiet autumn, Mr. Bittering stood, very dark now, very golden-eyed, upon the slope above his villa, looking at the valley. It's time to go back, said Cora. Yes, but we're not going, he said quietly. There's nothing there anymore. Your books, she said. Your fine clothes. Your illis. And your fine ior uere er, she said. The town's empty. No one's going back, he said. There's no reason to. None at all. The daughter wove tapestries, and the sons played songs on ancient flutes and pipes, their laughter echoing in the marble villa. Mr. Bittering gazed at the earth settlement far away in the low valley. Such odd, such ridiculous houses the earth people built. They didn't know any better, his wife mused. Such ugly people. I'm glad they've gone. They both looked at each other, startled by all they had just finished saying. They laughed. Where did they go? He wondered. He glanced at his wife. She was golden and slender as his daughter. She looked at him, and he seemed almost as young as their eldest son. I don't know, she said. We'll go back to town maybe next year, or the year after. Or the year after that, he said calmly. Now, I'm warm. How about taking a swim? They turned their backs to the valley. Arm in arm they walked silently down a path of clear running spring water. 5 years later, a rocket fell out of the sky. It lay steaming in the valley. Men leaped out of it, shouting, "We won the war on Earth! We're here to rescue you! Hey!" But the American-built town of cottages, peach trees, and theaters was silent. They found a half-finished rocket frame, rusting in an empty shop. The rocket men searched the hills. The captain established headquarters in an abandoned bar. His lieutenant came back to report. The town's empty, but we found native life in the hills, sir. Dark people. Yellow eyes. Martians. Very friendly. We talked a bit, not much. They learn English fast. I'm sure our relations will be most friendly with them, sir. Dark, eh? Mused the captain. How many? 600-800, I'd say, living in those marble ruins in the hills, sir. Tall. Healthy. Beautiful women. Did they tell you what became of the men and women who built this Earth settlement, Lieutenant? They hadn't the foggiest notion of what happened to this town or its people. Strange. You think those Martians killed them? They look surprisingly peaceful. Chances are a plague did this town in, sir. Perhaps. I suppose this is one of those mysteries we'll never solve. One of those mysteries you read about. The captain looked at the room, the dusty windows, the blue mountains rising beyond, the canals moving in the light, and he heard the soft wind in the air. He shivered. Then, recovering, he tapped a large, fresh map he had thumbtacked to the top of an empty table. Lots to be done, Lieutenant. His voice droned on and quietly on, as the sun sank behind the blue hills. New settlements, mining sites, minerals to be looked for, bacteriological specimens taken. The work, all the work. And the old records were lost. We'll have a job of remapping to do, renaming the mountains and rivers and such. Calls for a little imagination. What do you think of naming those mountains the Lincoln Mountains? This canal the Washington Canal? Those hills? We can name those hills for you, Lieutenant. Diplomacy. And you, for a favor, might name a town for me. Polishing the apple. And why not make this the Einstein Valley? And further over... Are you listening, Lieutenant? The lieutenant snapped his gaze from the blue color and the quiet mist of the hills far beyond the town. What? Oh, yes, sir. The town where no one got off. Crossing the continental United States by night, by day, on the train, you flash past town after wilderness town, where nobody ever gets off. Or rather, no person who doesn't belong. No person who hasn't roots in these country graveyards ever bothers to visit their lonely stations, or attend their lonely views. I spoke of this to a fellow passenger, another salesman like myself, on the Chicago-Los Angeles train as we crossed Iowa. "True," he said. "People get off in Chicago. Everyone gets off there. People get off in New York, get off in Boston, get off in L.A. People who don't live there go there to see and come back to tell. But what tourist ever got off at Fox Hill, Nebraska, to look at it? You? Me? No. I don't know anyone. Got no business there. It's no health resort. So why bother?" "Wouldn't it be a fascinating change," I said, "some year to plan a really different vacation? Pick some village lost on the plains where you don't know a soul, and go there for the hell of it." "You'd be bored stiff." "I'm not bored thinking of it." I peered out of the window. "What's the next town coming up on this line?" "Rampart Junction." I smiled. "Sounds good. I might get off there." "You're a liar and a fool. What do you want? Adventure? Romance? Go ahead, jump off the train. 10 seconds later, you'll call yourself an idiot, grab a taxi, and race us to the next town." "Maybe." I watched telephone poles flick by, flick by, flick by. Far ahead, I could see the first faint outlines of a town. "But I don't think so," I heard myself say. The salesman across from me looked faintly surprised, for slowly, very slowly, I was rising to stand. I reached for my hat. I saw my hand fumble for my one suitcase. I was surprised myself. "Hold on," said the salesman. "What are you doing?" The train rounded a curve suddenly. I swayed. Far ahead, I saw one church spire, a deep forest, a field of summer wheat. "It looks like I'm getting off the train," I said. "Sit down," he said. "No," I said. "There's something about that town up ahead. I've got to go see. I've got the time. I don't have to be in L.A., really, until next Monday. If I don't get off the train now, I'll always wonder what I missed, what I let slip by when I had the chance to see it." "We were just talking. There's nothing there." "You're wrong," I said. "There is." I put my hat on my head and lifted the suitcase in my hand. "My God," said the salesman. "I think you're really going to do it." My heart beat quickly. My face was flushed. The train whistled. The train rushed down the track. The town was near. "Wish me luck," I said. "Luck!" he cried. I ran for the porter, yelling. There was an ancient, flake-painted chair tilted back against the station platform wall. In this chair, completely relaxed so he sank into his clothes, was a man of some 70 years, whose timbers looked as if he'd been nailed there since the station was built. The sun had burned his face dark and tracked his cheek with lizard folds and stitches that held his eyes in a perpetual squint. His hair smoked ash-white in the summer wind. His blue shirt, open at the neck to show white clock springs, was bleached like the staring late-afternoon sky. His shoes were blistered as if he had held them, uncaring, in the mouth of a stove, motionless, forever. His shadow under him was stenciled a permanent black. As I stepped down, the old man's eyes flicked every door on the train and stopped, surprised at me. I thought he might wave. But there was only a sudden coloring of his secret eyes, a chemical change that was recognition. Yet he had not twitched so much as his mouth, an eyelid, a finger. An invisible bulk had shifted inside him. The moving train gave me an excuse to follow it with my eyes. There was no one else on the platform. No autos waited by the cobwebbed, nail-shut office. I alone had departed the iron thunder to set foot on the choppy waves of platform timber. The train whistled over the hill. Fool, I thought. My fellow passenger had been right. I would panic at the boredom I already sensed in this place. All right, I thought. Fool, yes. But run? No. I walked my suitcase down the platform, not looking at the old man. As I passed, I heard his thin bulk shift again, this time so I could hear it. His feet were coming down to touch and tap the mushy boards. I kept walking. Afternoon, a voice said, faintly. I knew he did not look at me, but only at that great cloudless spread of shimmering sky. Afternoon, I said. I started up the dirt road towards the town. 100 yards away, I glanced back. The old man, still seated there, stared at the sun, as if posing a question. I hurried on. I moved through the dreaming late afternoon town, utterly anonymous and alone, a trout going upstream, not touching the banks of a clear-running river of life that drifted all about me. My suspicions were confirmed. It was a town where nothing happened, where occurred only the following events. At 4 o'clock sharp, the Honegger hardware door slammed as a dog came out to dust himself in the road. 4:30, a straw sucked emptily at the bottom of a soda glass, making a sound like a great cataract in the drugstore silence. 5 o'clock, boys and pebbles plunged in the town river. 5:15, ants paraded in the slanting light under some elm trees. And yet, I turned in a slow circle. Somewhere in this town, there must be something worth seeing. I knew it was there. I knew I had to keep walking and looking. I knew I would find it. I walked. I looked. All through the afternoon there was only one constant and unchanging factor. The old man in the bleached blue pants and shirt was never far away. When I sat in the drugstore, he was out front spitting tobacco that rolled itself into tumblebugs in the dust. When I stood by the river, he was crouched downstream, making a great thing of washing his hands. Along about 7:30 in the evening, I was walking for the 7th or 8th time through the quiet streets when I heard footsteps beside me. I looked over, and the old man was pacing me, looking straight ahead, a piece of dried grass in his stained teeth. "It's been a long time," he said, quietly. We walked along in the twilight. "A long time," he said, "waitin' on that station platform." "You?" I said. "Me." He nodded in the tree shadows. "Were you waiting for someone at the station?" "Yes," he said. "You." "Me?" The surprise must have shown in my voice. "But why? You never saw me before in your life." Did I say I did? I just said I was waiting. We were on the edge of town now. He had turned, and I had turned with him along the darkening riverbank towards the trestle where the night trains ran over, going east, going west, but stopping rare few times. You want to know anything about me? I asked suddenly. You the sheriff? No, not the sheriff. And no, I don't want to know nothing about you. He put his hands in his pockets. The sun was set now. The air was suddenly cool. I'm just surprised you're here at last, is all. Surprised? Surprised, he said. And pleased. I stopped abruptly and looked straight at him. How long have you been sitting on that station platform? 20 years, give or take a few. I knew he was telling the truth. His voice was as easy and quiet as the river. Waiting for me? I said. Or someone like you, he said. We walked on in the growing dark. How you like our town? Nice. Quiet, I said. Nice. Quiet. He nodded. Like the people? People look nice and quiet. They are, he said. Nice. Quiet. I was ready to turn back, but the old man kept talking, and in order to listen and be polite, I had to walk with him in the vaster darkness, the tides of field and meadow beyond town. Yes, said the old man. The day I retired, 20 years ago, I sat down on that station platform, and there I've been, sittin' doing nothing, waiting for something to happen. I didn't know what. I didn't know. I couldn't say. But when it finally happened, I'd know it. I'd look at it and say, yes, sir, that's what I was waiting for. Train wreck? No. Old woman friend come back to town after 50 years? No. No. It's hard to say. Someone. Something. And it seems to have something to do with you. I wish I could tell. Why don't you try? I said. The stars were coming out. We walked on. Well, he said slowly, you know much about your own insides? You mean my stomach, or you mean psychologically? That's the word. I mean your head, your brain. You know much about that? The grass whispered under my feet. A little. You hate many people in your time? Some. We all do. It's normal enough to hate, ain't it? And not only hate, but, while we don't talk about it, don't we sometimes want to hit people who hurt us? Even kill them? Hardly a week passes we don't get that feeling, I said, and put it away. We put away all our lives, he said. The town says thus and so. Mom and Dad say this and that. The law says such and such. So you put away one killing and another, and two more after that. By the time you're my age, you got lots of that kind of stuff between your ears. And unless you went to war, nothing ever happened to get rid of it. Some men trap shoot, or hunt ducks, I said. Some men box or wrestle. and some don't. I'm talking about them that don't. Me. All my life, I've been salting down those bodies, putting them away on ice in my head. Sometimes you get mad at a town and the people in it for making you put things aside like that. You like the old caveman who just gave a hell of a yell and wanged somebody on the head with a club. Which all leads up to... Everybody'd like to do one killing in his life, to sort of work off that big load of stuff. All those killings in his mind he never did have the guts to do. And once in a while, a man has a chance. Someone runs in front of his car, and he forgets the brakes and keeps going. Nobody can prove nothing with that sort of thing. The man don't even tell himself he did it. He just didn't get his foot on the brake in time. But you know, and I know, what really happened, don't we? Yes, I said. The town was far away now. We moved over a small stream on a wooden bridge, just near the railway embankment. Now, said the old man, looking at the water, the only kind of killing worth doing is the one where nobody can guess who did it, or why they did it, or who they did it to, right? Well, I got this idea maybe 20 years ago. I don't think about it every day or every week. Sometimes months go by, but the idea's this. Only one train stops here each day. Sometimes not even that. Now, if you wanted to kill someone, you'd have to wait, wouldn't you? For years and years, until a complete and actual stranger came to your town. A stranger who got off the train for no reason. A man nobody knows, and you don't know nobody in the town. Then, and only then, I thought, sitting there on that station chair, you could just go up, and when nobody's around, kill him, and throw him in the river. He'd be found miles downstream. Maybe he'd never be found. Nobody would ever think to come to Rampart Junction to find him. He wasn't going there. He was on his way someplace else. There. That's my whole idea. And I'd know that man the minute he got off the train. Know him just as clear. I had stopped walking. It was dark. The moon would not be up for an hour. Would you? I said. Yes, he said. I saw the motion of his head looking at the stars. Well, I've talked enough. He sidled close and touched my elbow. His hand was feverish, as if he had held it to a stove before touching me. His other hand, his right hand, was hidden, tight and bunched in his pocket. I've talked enough. Something screamed. I jerked my head. Above, a fast-flying night express razored along the unseen tracks, flourished light on hill, forest, farm, town dwellings, field, ditch, meadow, plowed earth and water, then, raving high, cut off away, shrieking, gone. The rails trembled for a little while after that. Then silence. The old man and I stood looking at each other in the dark. His left hand was still holding my elbow. His other hand was still hidden. "May I say something?" I said at last. The old man nodded. "About myself," I said. I had to stop. I could hardly breathe. I forced myself to go on. "It's funny. I've often thought the same way as you. Sure, just today, going cross-country, I thought, how perfect. How really perfect it could be. Business has been bad for me lately. Wife sick. Good friend died last week. War in the world. Full of boils myself. It would do me a world of good." "What?" the old man said, his hand on my arm. "To get off this train in a small town," I said, "where nobody knows me, with this gun under my arm, and find someone, and kill them, and bury them, and go back down to the station, and get on, and go home, and nobody the wiser. And nobody ever to know who did it. Ever. Perfect, I thought. A perfect crime." And I got off the train. We stood there in the dark for another minute, staring at each other. Perhaps we were listening to each other's hearts beating very fast indeed. The world turned under me. I clenched my fists. I wanted to fall. I wanted to scream, like the train. For suddenly I saw that all the things I had just said were not lies put forth to save my life. All the things I had just said to this man were true. And now I knew why I had stepped from the train and walked up through this town. I knew what I had been looking for. I heard the old man breathing hard and fast. His hand was tight on my arm, as if he might fall. His teeth were clenched. He leaned towards me as I leaned towards him. There was a terrible, silent moment of immense strain, as before an explosion. He forced himself to speak at last. It was the voice of a man crushed by a monstrous burden. "How do I know you got a gun under your arm?" "You don't know." My voice was blurred. "You can't be sure." He waited. I thought he was going to faint. "That's how it is," he said. "That's how it is," I said. He shut his eyes tight. He shut his mouth tight. After another 5 seconds, very slowly, heavily, he managed to take his hand away from my own immensely heavy arm. He looked down at his right hand then, and took it, empty, out of his pocket. Slowly, with great weight, we turned away from each other and started walking blind, completely blind, in the dark. The midnight passenger-to-be-picked-up flare sputtered on the tracks. Only when the train was pulling out of the station did I lean from the open Pullman door and look back. The old man was seated there, with his chair tilted against the station wall, with his faded blue pants and shirt, and his sun-baked face, and his sun-bleached eyes. He did not glance at me as the train slid past. He was gazing east along the empty rails, where tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, a train, some train, any train might fly by here, might slow, might stop. His face was fixed. His eyes were blindly frozen towards the east. He looked 100 years old. The train wailed. Suddenly old myself, I leaned out, squinting. Now the darkness that had brought us together stood between. The old man, the station, the town, the forest were lost in the night. For an hour, I stood in the roaring blast, staring back at all that darkness. Here there be tigers. You have to beat a planet at its own game, said Chatterton. Get in, rip it up, poison its animals, dam its rivers, sow its fields, depollinate its air, mine it, nail it down, hack away at it, and get the hell out from under when you have what you want. Otherwise, a planet will fix you good. You can't trust planets. They're bound to be different, bound to be bad, bound to be out to get you. Especially this far off, 1 billion miles from nowhere, so you get them first. Tear their skin off, I say. Drag out the minerals and run away before the damn world explodes in your face. That's the way to treat them. The rocket ship sank down towards Planet 7 of Star System 84. They had traveled millions upon millions of miles. Earth was far away. Her system and her sun forgotten. Her system settled and investigated and profited on, and other systems rummaged through and milked and tidied up. And now, the rockets of these tiny men from an impossibly remote planet were probing out to far universes. In a few months, a few years, they could travel anywhere, for the speed of their rocket was the speed of a god. And now, for the 10,000th time, one of the rockets of the far-circling hunt was feathering down towards an alien world. No, said Captain Forrester. I have too much respect for other worlds to treat them the way you want to, Chatterton. It's not my business to rape or ruin, anyway, thank God. I'm glad I'm just a rocket man. You're the anthropologist-mineralogist. Go ahead. Do your mining and ripping and scraping. I'll just watch. I'll just go around looking at this new world, whatever it is, however it seems. I like to look. All rocket men are lookers, or they wouldn't be rocket men. You like to smell new airs if you're a rocket man, and see new colors, and new people if there are new people to see, and new oceans, and islands. Take your gun along, said Chatterton. In my holster, said Forrester. They turned to the port together and saw the green world rising up to meet their ship. I wonder what it thinks of us, said Forrester. It won't like me, said Chatterton. By God, I'll see to it it won't like me. And I don't care. You know, I don't give a damn. I'm out for the money. Land us over there, will you, Captain? That looks like iron country if ever I saw it. It was the freshest green color they had seen since childhood. Lakes lay like clear blue water droplets through the soft hills. There were no loud highways, signboards, or cities. It's a sea of green golf links, thought Forrester, which goes on forever. Putting greens, driving greens. You could walk 10,000 miles in any direction and never finish your game. A Sunday planet, a croquet lawn world, where you could lie on your back, clover in your lips, eyes half shut, smiling at the sky, smelling the grass, drowse through an eternal Sabbath, rousing only on occasion to turn the Sunday paper or crack the red-striped wooden ball through the hoop. If ever a planet was a woman, this one is. "Woman on the outside, man on the inside," said Chatterton. "All hard underneath, all male iron, copper, uranium, black sod. Don't let the cosmetics fool you." He walked to the bin where the earth drill waited. Its great screw snout glittered bluely, ready to stab 70 feet deep and suck out corks of earth, deeper still with extensions into the heart of the planet. Chatterton winked at it. "We'll fix your woman, Forrester, but good." "Yes, I know you will," said Forrester quietly. The rocket landed. "It's too green, too peaceful," said Chatterton. "I don't like it." He turned to the captain. "We'll go out with our rifles." "I give orders if you don't mind." "Yes, and my company pays our way with millions of dollars of machinery we must protect. Quite an investment." The air on the new Planet 7 in Star System 84 was good. The port swung wide. The men filed out into the greenhouse world. The last man to emerge was Chatterton, gun in hand. As Chatterton set foot to the green lawn, the earth trembled. The grass shook. The distant forest rumbled. The sky seemed to blink and darken imperceptibly. The men were watching Chatterton when it happened. "An earthquake, by God!" Chatterton's face paled. Everyone laughed. "It doesn't like you, Chatterton." "Nonsense." The trembling died away at last. "Well," said Captain Forrester, "it didn't quake for us, so it must be that it doesn't approve of your philosophy." "Coincidence," Chatterton smiled. "Come now, on the double. I want the drill out here in a half hour for a few samplings." "Just a moment," Forrester stopped laughing. "We've got to clear the area first. Be certain there are no hostile people or animals. Besides, it isn't every year you hit a planet like this." "Very nice. Can you blame us if we want to have a look at it?" "All right," Chatterton joined them. "Let's get it over with." They left a guard at the ship, and they walked away over fields and meadows, over small hills and into little valleys, like a bunch of boys out hiking on the finest day of the best summer in the most beautiful year in history, walking in the croquet weather, where if you listened, you could hear the whisper of the wooden ball across the grass, the click through the hoop, the gentle undulations of voices, a sudden high drift of women's laughter from some ivy-shaded porch, the tinkle of ice in the summer tea pitcher. "Hey," said Driscoll, one of the younger crewmen sniffing the air. "I brought a baseball and bat. We'll have a game later. What a diamond!" The men laughed quietly in the baseball season, in the good, quiet wind for tennis, in the weather for bicycling and picking wild grapes. "How do you like the job of mowing all this?" asked Driscoll. The men stopped. "I knew there was something wrong," cried Chatterton. "This grass. It's freshly cut." "Probably a species of dichondra, always short." Chatterton spat on the green grass and rubbed it in with his boot. "I don't like it. I don't like it. If anything happened to us, no one on Earth would ever know. Silly policy. If a rocket fails to return, we never send a second rocket to check the reason why. Natural enough, explained Forrester. We can't waste time on 1,000 hostile worlds, fighting futile wars. Each rocket represents years, money, lives. We can't afford to waste 2 rockets if one rocket proves a planet hostile. We go on to peaceful planets, like this one. I often wonder, said Driscoll, what happened to all those lost expeditions on worlds we'll never try again? Chatterton eyed the distant forest. They were shot, stabbed, broiled for dinner, even as we may be any minute. It's time we got back to work, Captain. They stood at the top of a little rise. Feel, said Driscoll, his hands and arms out loosely. Remember how you used to run when you were a kid, and how the wind felt? Like feathers on your arms. You ran and thought any minute you'd fly, but you never quite did. The men stood remembering. There was a smell of pollen and new rain drying upon a million grass blades. Driscoll gave a little run. Feel it, by God. The wind. You know, we never have really flown by ourselves. We have to sit inside tons of metal, away from flying, really. We've never flown like birds fly, to themselves. Wouldn't it be nice to put your arms out, like this? He extended his arms. And run. He ran ahead of them, laughing at his idiocy. And fly, he cried. He flew. Time passed on the silent gold wristwatches of the men standing below. They stared up, and from the sky came a high sound of almost unbelievable laughter. Tell him to come down, whispered Chatterton. He'll be killed. Nobody heard. Their faces were raised away from Chatterton. They were stunned and smiling. At last, Driscoll landed at their feet. Did you see me? My God, I flew! They had seen. Let me sit down. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. Driscoll slapped his knees, chuckling. I'm a sparrow. I'm a hawk. God bless me. Go on, all of you, try it. It's the wind. It picked me up and flew me, he said a moment later, gasping, shivering with delight. Let's get out of here. Chatterton started turning slowly in circles, watching the blue sky. It's a trap. It wants us all to fly in the air. Then it'll drop us all at once and kill us. I'm going back to the ship. You'll wait for my order on that, said Forrester. The men were frowning, standing in the warm, cool air, while the wind sighed about them. There was a kite sound in the air, a sound of eternal march. I asked the wind to fly me, said Driscoll, and it did. Forrester waved the others aside. I'll chance it next. If I'm killed, back to the ship, all of you. I'm sorry, I can't allow this. You're the captain, said Chatterton. We can't risk you. He took out his gun. I should have some sort of authority or force here. This game's gone on too long. I'm ordering us back to the ship. Holster your gun, said Forrester quietly. Stand still, you idiot! Chatterton blinked, now at this man, now at that. Haven't you felt it? This world's alive. It has a look to it. It's playing with us, biding its time. I'll be the judge of that, said Forrester. "You're going back to the ship in a moment, under arrest, if you don't put up that gun. If you fools won't come with me, you can die out here. I'm going back. Get my samples and get out. Chatterton! Don't try to stop me!" Chatterton started to run. Then, suddenly, he gave a cry. Everyone shouted and looked up. "There he goes," said Driscoll. Chatterton was up in the sky. Night had come on like the closing of a great but gentle eye. Chatterton sat stunned on the side of the hill. The other men sat around him, exhausted and laughing. He would not look at them. He would not look at the sky. He would only feel of the earth, and his arms and his legs and his body tightening in on himself. "God, wasn't it perfect?" said a man named Kostler. They had all flown, like orioles and eagles and sparrows, and they were all happy. "Come out of it, Chatterton. It was fun, wasn't it?" said Kostler. "It's impossible." Chatterton shut his eyes tight. "It can't do it. There's only one way for it to do it. It's alive. The air's alive. Like a fist, it picked me up. Any minute now, it can kill us all. It's alive." "All right," said Kostler. "Say it's alive. And a living thing must have purposes. Suppose the purpose of this world is to make us happy." As if to add to this, Driscoll came flying up, canteens in each hand. "I found a creek, tested and pure water. Wait till you try it." Forrester took a canteen, nudged Chatterton with it, offering a drink. Chatterton shook his head and drew hastily away. He put his hands over his face. "It's the blood of this planet. Living blood. Drink that. Put that inside, and you put this world inside you to peer out your eyes and listen through your ears. No thanks." Forrester shrugged and drank. "Wine," he said. "It can't be." "It is. Smell it. Taste it. A rare white wine." "French domestic." Driscoll sipped his. "Poison," said Chatterton. They passed the canteens round. They idled on through the gentle afternoon, not wanting to do anything to disturb the peace that lay all about them. They were like very young men in the presence of a great beauty, of a fine and famous woman, afraid that by some word, some gesture, they might turn her face away, avert her loveliness and her kindly attentions. They had felt the earthquake that had greeted Chatterton, thought Forrester, and they did not want the earthquake. Let them enjoy this day after school that's out, this fishing weather. Let them sit under the shade trees or walk on the tender hills, but let them drill no drillings, test no testings, contaminate no contaminations. They found a small stream which poured into a boiling water pool. Fish, swimming in the cold creek above, fell glittering into the hot spring and floated, minutes later, cooked, to the surface. Chatterton reluctantly joined the others, eating. "It'll poison us all. There's always a trick to things like this. I'm sleeping in the rocket tonight. You can sleep out if you want." To quote a map I saw in medieval history, "Here there be tigers. Sometime tonight, when you're sleeping, The tigers and cannibals will show up. Forrester shook his head. I'll go along with you. This planet is alive. It's a race unto itself. But it needs us to show off to appreciate its beauty. What's the use of a stage full of miracles if there's no audience? But Chatterton was busy. He was bent over, being sick. I'm poisoned! Poisoned! They held his shoulders until the sickness passed. They gave him water. The others were feeling fine. Better eat nothing but ship's food from now on, advised Forrester. It'd be safer. We're starting work right now, Chatterton swayed, wiping his mouth. We've wasted a whole day. I'll work alone if I have to. I'll show this damned thing. He staggered away towards the rocket. He doesn't know when he's well off, murmured Driscoll. Can't we stop him, Captain? He practically owns the expedition. We don't have to help him. There's a clause in our contract that guarantees refusal to work under dangerous conditions. So, do unto this picnic ground as you would have it do unto you. No initial cutting on the trees. Replace the turf on the greens. Clean up your banana peels after you. Now, below, in the ship, there was an immense humming. From the storage port rolled the great, shining drill. Chatterton followed it, called directions to its robot radio. This way! Here! The fool! Now! Cried Chatterton. The drill plunged its long screw bore into the green grass. Chatterton waved up at the other men. I'll show it! The sky trembled. The drill stood in the center of a little sea of grass. For a moment, it plunged away, bringing up moist corks of sod, which it spat unceremoniously into a shaking analysis bin. Now the drill gave a wrenched, metallic squeal, like a monster interrupted at its feed. From the soil beneath it, slow, bluish liquids bubbled up. Chatterton shouted, Get back, you fool! The drill lumbered in a prehistoric dance. It shrieked like a mighty train turning on a sharp curve, throwing out red sparks. It was sinking. The black slime gave under it in a dark pool. With a coughing sigh, a series of pants and churnings, the drill sank into a black scum like an elephant shot and dying, trumpeting like a mammoth at the end of an age, vanishing limb by ponderous limb into the pit. My God, said Forrester under his breath, fascinated with the scene. You know what that is, Driscoll? It's tar. The damn fool machine hit a tar pit. Listen, listen, cried Chatterton at the drill, running about on the edge of the oily lake. This way, over here! But like the old tyrants of the earth, the dinosaurs with their tubed and screaming necks, the drill was plunging and thrashing in the one lake from where there was no returning to bask on the firm and understandable shore. Chatterton turned to the other men far away. Do something! Someone! The drill was gone. The tar pit bubbled and gloated, sucking the hidden monster bones. The surface of the pool was silent. A huge bubble, the last, rose, expelled a scent of ancient petroleum, and fell apart. The men came down and stood on the edge of the little black sea. Chatterton stopped yelling. After a long minute of staring into the silent tar pool, Chatterton turned and looked at the hills, blindly at the green rolling lawns. The distant trees were growing fruit now, and dropping it, softly, to the ground. "I'll show it," he said quietly. "Take it easy, Chatterton." "I'll fix it," he said. "Sit down and have a drink. I'll fix it good. I'll show it can't do this to me." Chatterton started off back to the ship. "Wait a minute now," said Forrester. Chatterton ran. "I know what to do. I know how to fix it." "Stop him," said Forrester. He ran, then remembered he could fly. The A-bombs on the ship, if he should get to that. The other men had thought of that and were in the air. A small grove of trees stood between the rocket and Chatterton as he ran on the ground, forgetting that he could fly, or afraid to fly, or not allowed to fly, yelling. The crew headed for the rocket to wait for him, the captain with them. They arrived, formed a line, and shut the rocket port. The last they saw of Chatterton, he was plunging through the edge of the tiny forest. The crew stood waiting. That fool, that crazy guy. Chatterton did not come out on the other side of the small woodland. "He's turned back, waiting for us to relax our guard." "Go bring him in," said Forrester. 2 men flew off. Now, softly, a great and gentle rain fell upon the green world. "The final touch," said Driscoll. "We'd never have to build houses here. Notice, it's not raining on us. It's raining all around, ahead, behind us. What a world!" They stood dry, in the middle of the blue, cool rain. The sun was setting. The moon, a large one, the color of ice, rose over the freshened hills. "There's only one more thing this world needs." "Yes," said everyone, thoughtfully, slowly. "We'll have to go looking," said Driscoll. "It's logical. The wind flies us, the trees and streams feed us, everything is alive. Perhaps if we asked for companionship." "I've thought a long time, today and other days," said Kostler. "We're all bachelors, been traveling for years, and tired of it. Wouldn't it be nice to settle down somewhere? Here, maybe. On Earth you work like hell just to save enough to buy a house, pay taxes. The cities stink. Here, you won't even need a house, with this weather. If it gets monotonous, you can ask for rain, clouds, snow, changes. You don't have to work here for anything." "It'd be boring. We'd go crazy." "No," Kostler said, smiling. "If life got too soft, all we'd have to do is repeat a few times what Chatterton said. Here there be tigers. Listen." Far away, wasn't there the faintest roar of a giant cat, hidden in the twilight forest? The men shivered. "A versatile world," said Kostler dryly. "A woman who will do anything to please her guests, as long as we're kind to her. Chatterton wasn't kind." "Chatterton? What about him?" As if to answer this, someone cried from a distance. The 2 men who had flown off to find Chatterton were waving at the edge of the woods. Forrester, Driscoll, and Kostler flew down alone. "What's up?" The men pointed into the forest. "Thought you'd want to see this, Captain. It's damned eerie." One of the men indicated a pathway. "Look here, sir." The marks of great claws stood on the path, fresh and clear. And over here, a few drops of blood. A heavy smell of some feline animal hung in the air. Chatterton? I don't think we'll ever find him, Captain. Faintly, faintly, moving away, now gone in the breathing silence of twilight, came the roar of a tiger. The men lay on the resilient grass by the rocket, and the night was warm. Reminds me of nights when I was a kid, said Driscoll. My brother and I waited for the hottest night in July, and then we slept on the courthouse lawn, counting the stars, talking. It was a great night, the best night of the year, and now, when I think back on it, the best night of my life. Then he added, not counting tonight, of course. I keep thinking about Chatterton, said Costler. Don't, said Forrester. We'll sleep a few hours and take off. We can't chance staying here another day. I don't mean the danger that got Chatterton. No. I mean, if we stayed on, we'd get to liking this world too much. We'd never want to leave. A soft wind blew over them. I don't want to leave now. Driscoll put his hands behind his head, lying quietly. And it doesn't want us to leave. If we go back to Earth and tell everyone what a lovely planet it is, what then, Captain? They'll come smashing in here and ruin it. No, said Forrester idly. First, this planet wouldn't put up with a full-scale invasion. I don't know what it'd do, but it could probably think of some interesting things. Secondly, I like this planet too much. I respect it. We'll go back to Earth and lie about it. Say it's hostile. Which it would be to the average man, like Chatterton, jumping in here to hurt it. I guess we won't be lying after all. Funny thing, said Costler. I'm not afraid. Chatterton vanishes, is killed most horribly, perhaps. Yet we lie here. No one runs. No one trembles. It's idiotic. Yet, it's right. We trust it, and it trusts us. Did you notice, after you drank just so much of the wine water you didn't want more? A world of moderation. They lay listening to something like the great heart of this earth beating slowly and warmly under their bodies. Forrester thought, I'm thirsty. A drop of rain splashed on his lips. He laughed quietly. I'm lonely, he thought. Distantly, he heard soft, high voices. He turned his eyes in upon a vision. There was a group of hills, from which flowed a clear river, and in the shallows of that river, sending up spray, their faces shimmering, were the beautiful women. They played like children on the shore, and it came to Forrester to know about them and their life. They were nomads, roaming the face of this world as was their desire. There were no highways or cities. There were only hills and plains, and winds to carry them like white feathers where they wished. As Forrester shaped the question, some invisible answerer whispered the answers. There were no men. These women, alone, produced their race. The men had vanished 50,000 years ago. And where were these women now? A mile over on the wine stream, by the 6 white stones, and a 3rd mile to the large river. There, in the shallows, were the women who would make fine wives and raise beautiful children. Forrester opened his eyes. The other men were sitting up. I had a dream. They had all dreamed. A mile down from the green forest, a mile over on the wine stream. By the 6 white stones, said Kostler. And a 3rd mile to the large river, said Driscoll, sitting there. Nobody spoke again for a moment. They looked at the silver rocket standing there in the starlight. Do we walk or fly, Captain? Forrester said nothing. Driscoll said, Captain, let's stay. Let's never go back to Earth. They'll never come and investigate to see what happened to us. They'll think we were destroyed here. What do you say? Forrester's face was perspiring. His tongue moved again and again on his lips. His hands twitched over his knees. The crew sat waiting. It'd be nice, said the captain. Sure. But, Forrester sighed, we've got our job to do. People invested in our ship. We owe it to them to go back. Forrester got up. The men still sat on the ground, not listening to him. It's such a goddamn nice night, said Kostler. They stared at the soft hills and the trees and the river running off to other horizons. Let's get aboard the ship, said Forrester with difficulty. Captain, get aboard, he said. The rocket rose into the sky. Looking back, Forrester saw every valley and every tiny lake. We should have stayed, said Kostler. Yes, I know. It's not too late to turn back. I'm afraid it is. Forrester made an adjustment on the port telescope. Look now. Kostler looked. The face of the world was changed. Tigers, dinosaurs, mammoths appeared. Volcanoes erupted. Cyclones and hurricanes tore over the hills in a welter and fury of weather. Yes, she was a woman all right, said Forrester, waiting for visitors for millions of years, preparing herself, making herself beautiful. She put on her best face for us. When Chatterton treated her badly, she warned him a few times. And then, when he tried to ruin her beauty, she eliminated him. She wanted to be loved, like every woman, for herself, not for her wealth. So now, after she had offered us everything, we turn our backs. She's the woman scorned. She let us go, yes, but we can never come back. She'll be waiting for us with those. He nodded to the tigers and the cyclones and the boiling seas. Captain, said Kostler. Yes? It's a little late to tell you this, but just before we took off, I was in charge of the airlock. I let Driscoll slip away from the ship. He wanted to go. I couldn't refuse him. I'm responsible. He's back there now, on that planet. They both turned to the viewing port. After a long while, Forrester said, I'm glad. I'm glad one of us had enough sense to stay. But he's dead by now. No. That display down there is for us. Perhaps a visual hallucination. Underneath all the tigers and lions and hurricanes, Driscoll is quite safe and alive, because he's her only audience now. Oh, she'll spoil him rotten. He'll lead a wonderful life, he will, while we're slugging it out, up and down the system, looking for, but never finding a planet quite like this again. No, we won't try to go back and rescue Driscoll. I don't think she would let us anyway. Full speed ahead, Kostler. Make it full speed. The rocket leaped forward into greater acceleration. And just before the planet dwindled away in brightness and mist, Forrester imagined he could see Driscoll very clearly, walking away down from the green forest, whistling quietly, all of the fresh planet around him, a wine creek flowing for him, baked fish lolling in the hot springs, fruit ripening in the midnight trees, and distant forests and lakes waiting for him to happen by. Driscoll walked away across the endless green lawns, near the 6 white stones, beyond the forest, to the edge of the large, bright river. The day it rained forever. The hotel stood like a hollowed, dry bone under the very center of the desert sky, where the sun burned the roof all day. All night, the memory of the sun stirred in every room like the ghost of an old forest fire. Long after dusk, since light meant heat, the hotel lights stayed off. The inhabitants of the hotel preferred to feel their way blind through the halls in their never-ending search for cool air. This one particular evening, Mr. Turl, the proprietor, and his only boarders, Mr. Smith and Mr. Fremley, who looked and smelled like 2 ancient rags of cured tobacco, stayed late on the long veranda. In their creaking glockenspiel rockers, they gasped back and forth in the dark, trying to rock up a wind. Mr. Turl, wouldn't it be really nice someday if you could buy air conditioning? Mr. Turl coasted a while, eyes shut. Got no money for such things, Mr. Smith. The 2 old boarders flushed. They hadn't paid a bill now in 21 years. Much later, Mr. Fremley sighed a grievous sigh. Why don't we all just quit, pack up, get out of here, move to a decent city? Stop this swelterin' and fryin' and sweatin'. Who'd buy a dead hotel in a ghost town? Said Mr. Turl quietly. No, we'll just sit here and wait for that great day, January 29th. Slowly, all 3 men stopped rocking. January 29th. The one day in all the year when it really let go and rained. Won't wait long. Mr. Smith tilted his gold railroad watch like the warm summer noon in his palm. 2 hours and 9 minutes from now it'll be January 29th. But I don't see nary a cloud in 10,000 miles. It's rained every January 29th since I was born. Mr. Turl stopped, surprised at his own loud voice. If it's a day late this year, I won't pull God's shirt tail. Mr. Fremley swallowed hard and looked from east to west across the desert towards the hills. I wonder, will there ever be a gold rush hereabouts again? No gold, said Mr. Smith. And what's more, I'll make you a bet. No rain. No rain tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. No rain all the rest of this year." The three old men sat staring at the big, sun-yellowed moon that burned a hole in the high stillness. After a long while, painfully, they began to rock again. The first hot morning breezes curled the calendar pages like a dried snakeskin against the flaking hotel front. The three men, thumbing their braces over their hat-rack shoulders, came barefoot downstairs to blink out at that idiot sky. January 29th. Not a drop of mercy there. Day's young. I'm not. Mr. Fremley turned and went away. It took him 5 minutes to find his way up through the delirious hallways to his hot, freshly baked bed. At noon, Mr. Turrell peered in. "Mr. Fremley?" "Damn desert cactus. That's us," gasped Mr. Fremley, lying there, his face looking as if at any moment it might fall away in a blazing dust on the raw plank floor. "But even the best damn cactus got to have just a sip of water before it goes back to another year of the same damn furnace. I tell you I won't move again. I'll lie here and die if I don't hear more than birds patting around up on that roof." "Keep your prayers simple and your umbrella handy," said Mr. Turrell, and tiptoed away. At dusk, on the hollow roof, a faint pattering sounded. Mr. Fremley's voice sang out mournfully from his bed. "Mr. Turrell, that ain't rain. That's you with the garden hose sprinkling well water on the roof. Thanks for trying, but cut it out now." The pattering sound stopped. There was a sigh from the yard below. Coming around the side of the hotel a moment later, Mr. Turrell saw the calendar fly out and down in the dust. "Damn January 29th, cried a voice. 12 more months. Have to wait 12 more months now." Mr. Smith was standing there in the doorway. He stepped inside and brought out 2 dilapidated suitcases and thumped them on the porch. "Mr. Smith," cried Mr. Turrell, "you can't leave after 30 years. "They say it rains 20 days a month in Ireland," said Mr. Smith. "I'll get a job there and run around with my hat off and my mouth open." "You can't go." Mr. Turrell tried frantically to think of something. He snapped his fingers. "You owe me $9,000 rent." Mr. Smith recoiled. His eyes got a look of tender and unexpected hurt in them. "I'm sorry." Mr. Turrell looked away. "I didn't mean that. Look now, you just head for Seattle. Pours 2 inches a week there. Pay me when you can, or never. But do me a favor. Wait till midnight. It's cooler then anyhow. Get you a good night's walk towards the city." "Nothing'll happen between now and midnight." "You got to have faith. When everything else is gone, you got to believe a thing'll happen. Just stand here, with me. You don't have to sit. Just stand here and think of rain. That's the last thing I'll ever ask of you." On the desert, sudden little whirlwinds of dust twisted up, sifted down. Mr. Smith's eye scanned the sunset horizon. "What do I think? Rain? Oh, you rain, come along here? Stuff like that?" Anything at all." Mr. Smith stood for a long time between his 2 mangy suitcases and did not move. 5, 6 minutes ticked by. There was no sound, save the two men's breathing in the dusk. Then, at last, very firmly, Mr. Smith stooped to grasp the luggage handles. Just then, Mr. Turrell blinked. He leaned forward, cupping his hand to his ear. Mr. Smith froze, his hands still on the luggage. From away among the hills, a murmur, a soft and tremulous rumble. "Storm comin'," hissed Mr. Turrell. The sound grew louder. A kind of whitish cloud rose up from the hills. Mr. Smith stood tall on tiptoe. Upstairs, Mr. Fremley sat up like Lazarus. Mr. Turrell's eyes grew wider and yet wider to take hold of what was coming. He held to the porch rail like the captain of a long-becalmed vessel, feeling the first stir of some tropic breeze that smelled of lime and the ice-cool white meat of coconut. The smallest wind stroked over his aching nostrils, as over the flues of a white-hot chimney. "There!" cried Mr. Turrell. "There!" And over the last hill, shaking out feathers of fiery dust, came the cloud, the thunder, the racketing storm. Over the hill, the first car to pass in 20 days flung itself down the valley with a shriek, a thud, and a wail. Mr. Turrell did not dare to look at Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith looked up, thinking of Mr. Fremley in his room. Mr. Fremley at the window looked down and saw the car expire and die in front of the hotel. For the sound that the car made was curiously final. It had come a very long way on blazing sulfur roads, across salt flats abandoned 10 million years ago by the shingling off of waters. Now, with wire ravelings like cannibal hair sprung up from seams, with a great eyelid of canvas top thrown back and melted to spearmint gum over the rear seat, the auto, a Kissel car, vintage 1924, gave a final shuddering, as if to expel its ghost upon the air. The old woman in the front seat of the car waited patiently, looking in at the three men, and the hotel, as if to say, "Forgive me, my friend is ill. I've known him a long while, and now I must see him through his final hour." So she just sat in the car waiting for the faint convulsions to cease, and for the great relaxation of all the bones which signifies that the final process is over. She must have sat a full half-minute longer listening to her car, and there was something so peaceful about her that Mr. Turrell and Mr. Smith leaned slowly towards her. At last she looked at them with a grave smile and raised her hand. Mr. Fremley was surprised to see his hand go out the window above, waving back to her. On the porch, Mr. Smith murmured, "Strange, it's not a storm. And I'm not disappointed. How come?" But Mr. Turrell was down the path and to the car. "We thought you were... that is..." He trailed off. "Turrell's my name, Joe Turrell." She took his hand and looked at him with absolutely clear and unclouded light blue eyes like water that has melted from snow 1,000 miles off and come a long way, purified by wind and sun. "Miss Blanche Hillgood," she said quietly, "graduate of the Grinnell College, unmarried teacher of music, 30 years high school glee club and student orchestra conductor, Green City, Iowa. 20 years private teacher of piano, harp, and voice. 1 month retired and living on a pension. And now, taking my roots with me, on my way to California. Miss Hillgood, you don't look to be going anywhere from here. I had a feeling about that. She watched the two men circle the car, cautiously. She sat like a child on the lap of a rheumatic grandfather, undecided. Is there nothing we can do? Make a fence of the wheels, dinner gong of the brake drums. The rest'll make a fine rock garden. Mr. Fremley shouted from the sky. Dead! I say, is the car dead? I can feel it from here. Well, it's way past time for supper. Mr. Turl put out his hand. Miss Hillgood, that there is Joe Turl's Desert Hotel, open 26 hours a day. Gila monsters and road runners, please register before going upstairs. Get you a night's sleep. Free. We'll knock our Ford off its blocks and drive you to the city come morning. She let herself be helped from the car. The machine groaned as if in protest at her going. She shut the door carefully, with a soft click. One friend gone, but the other still with me. Mr. Turl, could you please bring her in out of the weather? Her, ma'am? Forgive me, I never think of things but what they're people. The car was a man, I suppose, because it took me places. But a harp, now, don't you agree, is female? She nodded to the rear seat of the car. There, tilted against the sky like an ancient scrolled leather ship prow cleaving the wind, stood a case which towered above any driver who might sit up in front and sail the desert calms or the city traffics. Mr. Smith, said Mr. Turl, lend a hand. They untied the huge case and hoisted it gingerly out between them. What you got there? Cried Mr. Fremley from above. Mr. Smith stumbled. Miss Hillgood gasped. The case shifted in the two men's arms. From within the case came a faint musical humming. Mr. Fremley, above, heard. It was all the answer he needed. Mouth open, he watched the lady and the two men and their boxed friend sway and vanish in the cavernous porch below. Watch out, said Mr. Smith. Some damn fool left his luggage here. He stopped. Some damn fool? Me? The two men looked at each other. They were not perspiring any more. A wind had come up from somewhere. A gentle wind that fanned their shirt collars and flapped the strewn calendar gently in the dust. My luggage, said Mr. Smith. Then they all went inside. More wine, Miss Hillgood. Ain't had wine on the table in years. Just a touch, if you please. They sat by the light of a single candle, which made the room an oven, and struck fire from the good silverware and the uncracked plates, as they talked and drank warm wine and ate. Miss Hillgood, get on with your life. All my life, she said, I've been so busy running from Beethoven to Bach to Brahms, I never noticed I was 29. Next time I looked up, I was 40. Yesterday, 71. Oh, there were men, but they'd given up singing at 10 and given up flying when they were 12. I always figured we were born to fly, one way or other, so I couldn't stand most men shuffling along with all the iron in the earth in their blood. I never met a man who weighed less than 900 pounds. In their black business suits, you could hear them roll by like funeral wagons. So you flew away? Just in my mind, Mr. Turl. It's taken 60 years to make the final break. All that time I grabbed on to piccolos and flutes and violins because they make streams in the air, you know, like streams and rivers on the ground. I rode every tributary and tried every freshwater wind from Handel on down to a whole slew of Strausses. It's been the far way around that's brought me here. How'd you finally make up your mind to leave? Asked Mr. Smith. I looked around last week and said, "Why, look, you've been flying alone. No one in all Green City really cares if you fly or how high you go. It's always, 'Fine, Blanche,' or 'Thanks for the recital at the PTAT, Miss H.' But no one really listening. And when I talked a long time ago about Chicago or New York, folks swatted me and laughed. Why be a little frog in a big pond when you can be the biggest frog in all Green City? So I stayed on, while the folks who gave me advice moved away or died, or both. The rest had wax in their ears. Just last week I shook myself and said, 'Hold on. Since when do frogs have wings?' So now you're heading west," said Mr. Turrell. "Maybe to play in pictures, or in that orchestra under the stars, but somewhere I just might play at last, for someone who'll hear and really listen." They sat there in the warm dark. She was finished. She had said it all now, foolish or not, and she moved back quietly in her chair. Upstairs, someone coughed. Miss Hillgood heard and rose. It took Mr. Fremley a moment to ungum his eyelids and make out the shape of the woman bending down to place the tray by his rumpled bed. "What you all talking about down there just now?" "I'll come back later and tell you word for word," said Miss Hillgood. "Eat now. The salad's fine." She moved to leave the room. He said quickly, "You going to stay?" She stopped half out of the door and tried to trace the expression on his sweating face in the dark. He, in turn, could not see her mouth or eyes. She stood a moment longer, silently, then went on down the stairs. "She must not have heard me," said Mr. Fremley. But he knew she had heard. Miss Hillgood crossed the downstairs lobby to fumble with the locks on the upright leather case. "I must pay you for my supper." "On the house," said Mr. Turrell. "I must pay," she said, and opened the case. There was a sudden flash of gold. The two men quickened in their chairs. They squinted at the little old woman standing beside the tremendous heart-shaped object, which towered above her with its shining columbined pedestal, atop which a calm Grecian face with antelope eyes looked serenely at them, even as Miss Hillgood looked now. The two men shot each other the quickest and most startled of glances, as if each had guessed what might happen next. They hurried across the lobby, breathing hard, to sit on the very edge of the hot velvet lounge, wiping their faces with damp handkerchiefs. Miss Hillgood drew a chair under her, rested the golden harp gently back on her shoulder, and put her hands to die strings. Mr. Turrell took a breath of fiery air and waited. A desert wind came suddenly along the porch outside, tilting the chairs so they rocked this way and that, like boats on a pond at night. Mr. Fremley's voice protested from above, "What's going on down there?" And then Miss Hillgood moved her hands. Starting at the arch near her shoulder, she played her fingers out along the simple tapestry of wires towards the blind and beautiful stare of the Greek goddess on her column, and then back. Then, for a moment, She paused and let the sounds drift up through the baked lobby air and into all the empty rooms. If Mr. Fremley shouted above, no one heard, for Mr. Turle and Mr. Smith were so busy jumping up to stand riven in the shadows, they heard nothing save the storming of their own hearts and the shocked rush of all the air in their lungs. Eyes wide, mouths dropped, in a kind of pure insanity, they stared at the two women there, the blind muse proud on her golden pillar, and the seated one, gentle eyes closed, her small hands stretched forth on the air. Like a girl, they both thought wildly, like a little girl putting her hands out of a window to feel what? Why, of course, to feel the rain. The echo of the first shower vanished down remote causeways and roof drains, away. Mr. Fremley, above, rose from his bed as if pulled round by his ears. Miss Hilgood played. She played, and it wasn't a tune they knew at all, but it was a tune they had heard 1,000 times in their long lives, words or not, melody or not. She played, and each time her fingers moved, the rain fell pattering through the dark hotel. The rain fell cool at the open windows, and the rain rinsed down the baked floorboards of the porch. The rain fell on the rooftop, and fell on hissing sand. It fell on rusted car, and empty stable, and dead cactus in the yard. It washed the windows, and laid the dust, and filled the rain barrels, and curtained the doors with beaded threads that might part and whisper as you walked through. But more than anything, the soft touch and coolness of it fell on Mr. Smith and Mr. Turle. Its gentle weight and pressure moved them down and down until it had seated them again. By its continuous budding and prickling on their faces, it made them shut up their eyes and mouths and raise their hands to shield it away. Seated there, they felt their heads tilt slowly back to let the rain fall where it would. The flash flood lasted a minute, then faded away as the fingers trailed down the loom, let drop a few last bursts and squalls, and then stopped. The last chord hung in the air like a picture taken when lightning strikes and freezes a billion drops of water on their downward flight. Then the lightning went out. The last drops fell through darkness in silence. Miss Hilgood took her hands from the strings, her eyes still shut. Mr. Turle and Mr. Smith opened their eyes to see those two miraculous women, way over there across the lobby, somehow come through the storm, untouched and dry. They trembled. They leaned forward, as if they wished to speak. They looked helpless, not knowing what to do. And then a single sound from high above in the hotel corridors drew their attention and told them what to do. The sound came floating down feebly, fluttering like a tired bird beating its ancient wings. The two men looked up and listened. It was the sound of Mr. Fremley. Mr. Fremley, in his room, applauding. It took 5 seconds for Mr. Turle to figure out what it was. Then he nudged Mr. Smith and began himself to beat his palms together. The two men struck their hands in mighty explosions. The echoes ricocheted around about in the hotel caverns above and below, striking walls, mirrors, windows, trying to fight free of the rooms. Miss Hilgood opened her eyes now, as if this new storm had come on her in the open, unprepared. The men gave their own recital. They smashed their hands together so fervently, it seemed they had fistfuls of firecrackers to set off, one on another. Mr. Fremley shouted. Nobody heard, Hands winged out, banged shut again and again, until fingers puffed up, and the old men's breath came short, and they put their hands at last on their knees, a heart pounding inside each one. Then, very slowly, Mr. Smith got up, and still looking at the harp, went outside and carried in the suitcases. He stood at the foot of the lobby stairs, looking for a long while at Miss Hillgood. He glanced down at her single piece of luggage resting there by the first tread. He looked from her suitcase to her, and raised his eyebrows, questioningly. Miss Hillgood looked at her harp, at her suitcase, at Mr. Turrell, and at last back to Mr. Smith. She nodded once. Mr. Smith bent down, and with his own luggage under one arm and her suitcase in the other, he started the long, slow climb up the stairs in the gentle dark. As he moved, Miss Hillgood put the harp back on her shoulder, and either played in time to his moving, or he moved in time to her playing. Neither of them knew which. Half up the flight, Mr. Smith met Mr. Fremley, who, in a faded robe, was testing his slow way down. Both stood there, looking deep into the lobby at the one man on the far side in the shadows, and the two women farther over, no more than a motion and a gleam. Both thought the same thoughts. The sound of the harp playing, the sound of the cool water falling every night, and every night of their lives after this. No spraying the roof with the garden hose now, any more. Only sit on the porch or lie in your night bed and hear the falling, the falling, the falling. Mr. Smith moved on up the stair. Mr. Fremley moved down. The harp, the harp. Listen, listen. The 50 years of drought were over. The time of the long rains had come. Fever Dream. They put him between fresh, clean, laundered sheets, and there was always a newly squeezed glass of thick orange juice on the table under the dim pink lamp. All Charles had to do was call, and Mom or Dad would stick their heads into his room to see how sick he was. The acoustics of the room were fine. You could hear the toilet gargling its porcelain throat of mornings. You could hear rain tap the roof, or sly mice run in the secret walls, the canary singing in its cage downstairs. If you were very alert, sickness wasn't too bad. He was 15, Charles was. It was mid-September, with the land beginning to burn with autumn. He lay in the bed for 3 days before the terror overcame him. His hand began to change. His right hand. He looked at it, and it was hot and sweating there on the counterpane, alone. It fluttered. It moved a bit. Then it lay there, changing color. That afternoon the doctor came again and tapped his thin chest like a little drum. "How are you?" asked the doctor, smiling. "I know. Don't tell me. My cold is fine, doctor, but I feel lousy." "Ha!" He laughed at his own oft-repeated joke. Charles lay there, and for him that terrible and ancient jest was becoming a reality. The joke fixed itself in his mind. His mind touched and drew away from it in a pale terror. The doctor did not know how cruel he was with his jokes. "Doctor," whispered Charles, lying flat and colorless. "My hand. It doesn't belong to me anymore. This morning it changed into something else. I want you to change it back, Doctor. Doctor. The doctor showed his teeth and patted his hand. It looks fine to me, son. You just had a little fever dream. But it changed, Doctor. Oh, Doctor, cried Charles, pitifully holding up his pale, wild hand. It did. The doctor winked. I'll give you a pink pill for that. He popped a tablet onto Charles's tongue. Swallow. Will it make my hand change back and become me again? Yes, yes. The house was silent when the doctor drove off down the road in his carriage under the quiet, blue September sky. A clock ticked far below in the kitchen world. Charles lay looking at his hand. It did not change back. It was still something else. The wind blew outside. Leaves fell against the cool window. At 4 o'clock, his other hand changed. It seemed almost to become a fever, a chemical, a virus. It pulsed and shifted cell by cell. It beat like a warm heart. The fingernails turned blue and then red. It took about an hour for it to change, and when it was finished, it looked just like an ordinary hand. But it was not ordinary. It was no longer him anymore. He lay in a fascinated horror, and then fell into an exhausted sleep. Mother brought the soup up at 6. He wouldn't touch it. I haven't any hands, he said, eyes shut. Your hands are perfectly good, said Mother. No, he wailed. My hands are gone. I feel like I have stumps. Oh, Mama. Mama, hold me. Hold me, I'm scared. She had to feed him herself. Mama, he said, get the doctor, please, again. I'm so sick. The doctor will be here tonight at 8, she said, and went out. At 7, with night dark and close around the house, Charles was sitting up in bed when he felt the thing happening to first one leg, then the other. Mama, come quick! He screamed. But when Mama came, the thing was no longer happening. When she went downstairs, he simply lay without fighting, as his legs beat and beat, grew warm, red hot, and the room filled with the warmth of his feverish change. The glow crept up from his toes to his ankles, and then to his knees. May I come in? The doctor smiled in the doorway. Doctor, cried Charles, hurry, take off my blankets. The doctor lifted the blankets tolerantly. There you are, whole and healthy. Sweating, though. A little fever. I told you not to move around, bad boy. He pinched the moist pink cheek. Did the pills help? Did your hand change back? No. No, now it's my other hand and my legs. Well, well, I'll have to give you 3 more pills, 1 for each limb, eh, my little peach? Laughed the doctor. Will they help me? Please, please, what have I got? A mild case of scarlet fever, complicated by a slight cold. Is it a germ that lives and has more little germs in me? Yes. Are you sure it's scarlet fever? You haven't taken any tests? I guess I know a certain fever when I see one, said the doctor, checking the boy's pulse with cool authority. Charles lay there, not speaking, until the doctor was crisply packing his black kit. Then, in the silent room, the boy's voice made a small, weak pattern, his eyes alight with remembrance. I read a book once about petrified trees, wood turning to stone. about how trees fell and rotted, and minerals got in and built up, and they look just like trees. But they're not. They're stone. He stopped. In the quiet, warm room, his breathing sounded. "Well?" asked the doctor. "I've been thinking," said Charles after a time. "Do germs ever get big? I mean, in biology class they told us about one-celled animals, amoebas and things, and how, millions of years ago, they got together until there was a bunch, and they made the first body. And more cells got together and got bigger, and then finally maybe there was a fish, and finally here we are, and all we are is a bunch of cells that decided to get together to help each other out. Isn't that right?" Charles wet his feverish lips. "What's all this about?" The doctor bent over him. "I've got to tell you this. Doctor, oh, I've got to," he cried. "What would happen? Oh, just pretend. Please pretend that just like in the old days, a lot of microbes got together and wanted to make a bunch and reproduced and made more." His white hands were on his chest now, crawling towards his throat. "And they decided to take over a person," cried Charles. "Take over a person?" "Yes, become a person. Me, my hands, my feet. What if a disease somehow knew how to kill a person and yet live after him?" He screamed. The hands were on his neck. The doctor moved forward, shouting. At 9 o'clock, the doctor was escorted out to his carriage by the mother and father, who handed him up his bag. They conversed in the cool night wind for a few minutes. "Just be sure his hands are kept strapped to his legs," said the doctor. "I don't want him hurting himself." "Will he be all right, doctor?" The mother held to his arm a moment. He patted her shoulder. "Haven't I been your family physician for 30 years? It's the fever. He imagines things." "But those bruises on his throat. He almost choked himself." "Just you keep him strapped. He'll be all right in the morning." The horse and carriage moved off down the dark September road. At 3 in the morning, Charles was still awake in his small back room. The bed was damp under his head and his back. He was very warm. Now he no longer had any arms or legs, and his body was beginning to change. He did not move on the bed, but he looked at the vast blank ceiling space with insane concentration. For a while he had screamed and thrashed, but now he was weak and hoarse from it, and his mother had gotten up a number of times to soothe his brow with a wet towel. Now he was silent, his hands strapped to his legs. He felt the walls of his body change, the organs shift, the lungs catch fire like burning bellows of pink alcohol. The room was lighted up as with the flickerings of a hearth-place. Now he had no body. It was all gone. It was under him, but it was filled with a vast pulse of some burning, lethargic drug. It was as if a guillotine had neatly lopped off his head, and his head lay shining on a midnight pillow, while the body, below, still alive, belonged to somebody else. The disease had eaten his body, and from the eating had reproduced itself in feverish duplicate. There were the little hand hairs, and the fingernails, and the scars and the toenails, and the tiny mole on his right hip, all done again in perfect fashion. "I am dead," he thought. "I've been killed, and yet I live. My body is dead. It is all disease, and nobody will know. I will walk around, and it will not be me. It will be something else. It will be something all bad, all evil. So big and so evil it's hard to understand or think about. Something that will buy shoes and drink water and get married someday maybe and do more evil in the world than has ever been done. Now the warmth was stealing up his neck, into his cheeks, like a hot wine. His lips burned, his eyelids, like leaves, caught fire. His nostrils breathed out blue flame, faintly, faintly. This will be all, he thought. It'll take my head and my brain and fix each eye and every tooth and all the marks in my brain, and every hair and every wrinkle in my ears, and there'll be nothing left of me. He felt his brain fill with a boiling mercury. He felt his left eye clench in upon itself and, like a snail, withdraw, shift. He was blind in his left eye. It no longer belonged to him. It was enemy territory. His tongue was gone, cut out. His left cheek was numbed, lost. His left ear stopped hearing. It belonged to someone else now. This thing that was being born, this mineral thing replacing the wooden log, this disease replacing healthy animal cell. He tried to scream, and he was able to scream loud and high and sharply in the room, just as his brain flooded down. His right eye and right ear were cut out. He was blind and deaf, all fire and terror, all panic, all death. His scream stopped before his mother ran through the door to his side. It was a good, clear morning, with a brisk wind that helped carry doctor, horse, and carriage along the road to halt before the house. In the window above, the boy stood, fully dressed. He did not wave when the doctor waved and called, "What's this? Up? My God!" The doctor almost ran upstairs. He came gasping into the bedroom. "What are you doing out of bed?" he demanded of the boy. He tapped his thin chest, took his pulse and temperature. Absolutely amazing. Normal. Normal, by God. "I shall never be sick again in my life," declared the boy, quietly standing there, looking out of the wide window. "Never." "I hope not." "Why, you're looking fine, Charles." "Doctor?" "Yes, Charles?" "Can I go to school now?" asked Charles. "Tomorrow will be time enough. You sound positively eager." "I am. I like school. All the kids. I want to play with them and wrestle with them and spit on them and play with the girls' pigtails and shake the teacher's hand and rub my hands on all the cloaks in the cloakroom. And I want to grow up and travel and shake hands with people all over the world and be married and have lots of children and go to libraries and handle books and all of that I want to," said the boy, looking off into the September morning. "What's the name you called me?" "What?" the doctor puzzled. "I called you nothing but Charles." "It's better than no name at all, I guess," Charles shrugged. "I'm glad you want to go back to school," said the doctor. "I really anticipate it," smiled the boy. "Thank you for your help, doctor. Shake hands." "Glad to." They shook hands gravely, and the clear wind blew through the open window. They shook hands for almost a minute, the boy smiling up at the old man and thanking him. Then, laughing, the boy raced the doctor downstairs and out to his carriage. His mother and father followed for the happy farewell. "Fit as a fiddle," said the doctor. "Incredible." "And strong," said the father. He got out of his straps himself during the night, didn't you, Charles?" "Did I?" said the boy. "You did. How?" "Oh," the boy said, "that was a long time ago." "A long time ago?" They all laughed, and while they were laughing, the quiet boy moved his bare foot on the sidewalk and brushed against a number of red ants that were scurrying about on the sidewalk. Secretly, his eyes shining, while his parents chatted with the old man, he saw the ants hesitate, quiver, and lie still on the cement. He knew they were cold now. "Goodbye!" The doctor drove away, waving. The boy walked ahead of his parents. As he walked, he looked away towards the town and began to hum "School Days" under his breath. "It's good to have him well again," said the father. "Listen to him, he's so looking forward to school." The boy turned quietly. He gave each of his parents a crushing hug. He kissed them both several times. Then, without a word, he bounded up the steps into the house. In the parlor, before the others entered, he quickly opened the bird cage, thrust his hand in, and petted the yellow canary once. Then he shut the cage door, stood back, and waited. Audiobook recorded at Artis Studio 2006. Read by Adam Muskin.